2. I know we're getting late in the meeting, but let's try to keep it together as best we can. So, Ms. Bentley, have you had a chance to discuss with Ms. Rizanka the proposed settlement agreement that you circulated before we went to break?
I think she will probably want to speak for herself. My understanding is that they are not willing to agree to that.
Okay. All right, Ms. Rizanka, do you want to come up and say your piece?
Sure. Obviously, this is a surprise to me. There are things in here that there's no way in the world you would let your client agree to. We're not saying there's a health safety violation. We're not saying the stormwater is non-compliance. We believe that both of those are inaccurate. He will agree to the 35 days, but he's worried about waiving any rights. We seriously disagree with Ms. Bentley's analysis of whether or not the settlement agreement is a development order. The site plan is still valid, and the temporary CO is a permit, which is definitely tolled. So he's waiving valuable rights.
Mr. Rizanka, let me ask, so what you're saying is he's willing to take a unilateral extension without giving anything whatsoever in return?
Well, I'm telling you, I'm telling you what my client's telling me.
I've had clients like that too.
But you know, it's pulling the bond at this point. It's going to take longer. He's going to continue to do the work, even if you pull the bond. You're going to make his life more difficult by pulling the bond when he's trying to get the work done.
Well,
and so there is a natural disaster. I mean, there is a reason for that statute. It's not just out there because of no reason. You have a lot of people that had problems. He had a contractor die. He had one of the workers get COVID. I mean, there are things that happened along the way. I understand you didn't want impossibility, but sometimes it happens. That's why we have lawyers. That's why we have courts. We don't want it to go that far. I don't think it will, but he agreed to the 35 days, and then you can pull the bond. Otherwise, he's going to continue on, and we'll see what happens, and it could be a tug-of-war out there. Okay.
I appreciate, Mr. Rizanka. You did as admirable a job as anyone could expect of you. So certainly it's no slight to you, but I'm not willing to give a unilateral extension without anything being exchanged for it. So my thought is there's no further action we need to take on the item unless someone feels compelled to do otherwise.
Mr. Chair?
Commissioner Tabaya?
Can I ask Ms.
Please?
Ms. Bentley? Can you explain the status quo? We'll call the bond. He will continue, whether he continues to work on the project or not, he will continue to be able to operate the business. Is that correct?
Well, I believe we will pull the the temporary certificate of occupancy because he's not in compliance. Because he's not in compliance. We'll call the bond, and I assume that we will look at code enforcement action immediately.
And this is entirely avoidable, but he doesn't want to waive any tolling requirement. I mean, frankly, we're in a position that he wasn't entitled to get to in the first place. He has been given every benefit of even non-existent doubts. I don't have empathy at this point. I really don't. So essentially, there is an argument made that out of Tallahassee there is a change which serves to extend by a certain amount of time the duration that he would have to comply. Ms. Bentley doesn't believe that it applies. I think she has a good argument with respect to it not applying. Ms. Rizanka believes that it does apply, or at least that there's an argument to make that it applies. That's kind of the nuts and bolts the nuts and bolts Cliff Notes version of it. But if they're not willing to waive tolling, I wouldn't do a thing. I wouldn't extend it by 5 minutes.
You're good at, Mr. Chair?
Please, and then Commissioner Nardi.
I mean, it sounds like the business is, going to shut down, whether there's legal action one way or another, that's out of our control. Are you aware of, is there a middle ground to be had there?
I think we've offered it.
I'm wondering if we were to pull the certificate of occupancy for a period of time until which the situation was ameliorated, that would, it's not as good as the first offer, but it sounds like the second offer, the status quo is pretty draconian.
It's an emergency created by one side after a prolonged set of interactions with staff where they've had every ability to make this go away. And in fact, if they changed their mind right now, they could tell us and this wouldn't happen. But they've elected not to do that. If you'd like, I mean, the middle ground that I see, it's not really a middle ground necessarily, is to have a motion to authorize county staff to enter into an agreement extending this by 35 days should the applicant agree to waive any tolling entitlement. And if they change their mind in an hour or in 6 hours or perhaps even tomorrow, then that's the case if it gets, if it gets addressed before the bond's pulled.
Well, the time would clearly have to, I think that's a great, with the one exception that time would have to start now. You couldn't make that, 3 weeks.
Yeah.
The time would have to start
Yeah,
immediately.
so 35 days from right now.
Yeah, as they go through the process of looking at the potential outcomes, I think that's a great option.
Okay, so if you want to make a motion, or I can take that as a motion to authorize staff, and if I need to sign something, well, I need to sign anything, yes. Authorize the chair and authorize staff to execute any necessary documents in order to extend by 35 days the duration to comply with this, provided that a waiver of all tolling requirements is made by the other party.
At time which starts immediately.
Time starting now.
Correct.
All right, that a motion?
Yes, sir.
All right, and this is a second. All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Oh, Commissioner Snarty, I'm sorry. Yeah, I said I was going to get to you.
It's been on for a
Please.
while, and I've been waiting. Obviously, you could blame Squid Lips, you could blame, I have seen a little bit on both sides, and I know the county has bent over backwards. I can't say the amount of work that we put into it, and I agree with Commissioner Tobias on that thing. But the goal is to get it to compliance. The goal is to get the business, and I'm a little nervous about asking them to waive their rights because it may have other impacts that we're not aware of. We never really had a straight answer on that until now as well, on the tolling. So I don't think it's a big deal. Myself, this isn't a negotiation as far as a deal between the two, and I think 35 days isn't the end of the world. I mean, and threatening to shut them down and threatening to pull a bond and holding a CO, I think, is just crazy. I mean, we're talking 35 days. If he fails to comply, we pull it. He's doing work that was negotiated upon based on preventing runoff from the lagoon. Again, he was late, and that stinks, and I'm not saying he deserves a free pass for that, but we're talking 35 days. This isn't a divorce settlement. We don't have to say, okay, you give and I give. It's just what we decide to do. I want to see him in compliance, definitely. And has he made huge mistakes along the way? Sure he has. And we've pretty much kicked his teeth in for it. And staff has put in a crap ton of time. There's no question about it. But let's just get him there. Yes, Eden?
There is another option. You could deny the request as you have. You could direct us to pull the temporary certificate of occupancy and then direct us to delay calling the bond for a period of time.
I wouldn't give it 35 seconds.
That really wasn't what I was suggesting, but I appreciate the input.
And I'm just looking here for my text message. This is back from last month to Kim. I spoke with John in person, and staff is staff is not planning on extending completion time. My strong recommendation is for your client to get things done ASAP, all caps, before July deadline. So this was not a surprise to anyone.
But I'm
So-
sure the death of somebody and COVID and everything else probably was a little bit of a
And I
surprise.
gave them months longer. Sir, we're not going to have a back and forth. I apologize. I mean, the bottom line is they were given more time than they requested with the very explicit, as I believe Commissioner Tobias mentioned, but Ms. Bentley can mention as well, it was at least as explicit when we had the meeting in the county attorney's office that I didn't want to hear any excuse for why it wasn't done. So I don't have any empathy at this point. My empathy has dried up. Commissioner Pritchett?
Again, just to define this, it's a small amount that's left to be done, and it should have no reason why it couldn't be done in 35 days, and then all this just goes away anyways.
If they would agree to a 35-day extension and waive any tolling arguments they have, then that's fine. That's up to them. But if
So-
they don't want to do it, they're putting us in a position
So
that,
logic says that we're really not going to get it done in 35 days anyways, and this is going to come back if we don't, since we added some time to it. And I mean, if you came out and you said I need 41 days, that might be very prudent at this time. But I agree, if we got a small amount done and you say it's only going to take a few weeks to do, I don't understand the significance of the 35-day timeline, and then everything is fine.
Commissioner Smith?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just like to remind this board that as much as I can remember, and sometimes I can't remember yesterday, sometimes I even have trouble with my name. No, it's not that bad. I've been dealing with this since 2015, so what you guys have been hearing is what you've been hearing, but I've been hearing it a lot longer than you have.
Were there excuses back then as well?
Yes. So I just want to see it get done. You know,
So
I understand he's a businessman. I don't, for the life of me, understand why it keeps taking as long as it does. He's the guy that signs the checks. He can crack the whip.
So you're saying
We gave him 6 months, 9 months ago, and you were kind enough to say, I'll throw in another 3 months just to give you all the extra time you possibly could ever need.
So what you're saying is the contractor may have died from old age working on this project?
I'm not sure what's happened here.
All right, Commissioner Tobias, let's get to it. If you don't mind, would you mind making a motion authorizing the chair and authorizing county staff to execute any necessary documents in order to grant them a 35-day extension starting today in exchange for their waiving any tolling arguments they may have?
That and Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
that would be my motion, adding in the reaffirming the remainder of the settlement agreement.
Perfect.
So there's no changes
All right,
there.
this is my second to that motion. So all in favor of the motion as stated, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimously. All right, thank you all. And Ms. Rosenka, I think you did a great job with what you had. I really do. You know, I've had cases where things have been better and worse than others, and this is one of those. I do not envy you. All right, public comment. Let's take a look here. We addressed one from Dr. Lesser, so that's done. L, board reports.
Can we hear from him again, Mr. Chair?
Dr. Lesser?
I'd
If he's
appreciate
around,
it.
we can hear about his book, perhaps. All right, Mr. Bate.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. I have a number of items I want to go over.
Oh, no.
The first one being that,
Get comfy.
the first item being the Small Business PPE Program. Want to let you know that that did get underway yesterday, and in the first day we had 212 applications received. That
Awesome.
will be continuing until July 31st, the online application at Brevard. fl.gov, and anyone can, in the businesses that are qualified for that, can make the application, and we will be getting them that PPE package that the board has approved. That's the first program. And I wanted to mention that that program is limited to certain types of small businesses of 25 or less. That's what the board has approved. The second item I wanted to mention was the Small Business and Nonprofit Economic Relief Program. I want to give you a couple of updates. The first is that after discussions with the Chamber, we tried to get to a place where they would administer the program. We gave them a draft contract, and they let us know that after reviewing where things were, they did not think that was a good fit for them, so they declined the opportunity to move forward in administering the program. So we are now going to do it internally with staff. We'll use staff from all the different departments. I met with senior staff yesterday, and we have strategized a plan moving forward. We'll be meeting with the directors tomorrow, and then we will be meeting with the appropriate staff that will be involved in reviewing applications as they're received. And we'll be meeting with that staff starting on Friday. So we anticipate that program being in place for online applications from July 27th through August 10th. That will be the period when businesses can apply for that program, or nonprofits can apply for the program. Mentioning nonprofits, as all of you, I'm sure, will recall, at the last board meeting, the issue came up and you directed the county attorney to look at options relating to nonprofits to address concerns that the board had raised. For us to move the program and the application forward, we really need board direction relative to any of the input that the county attorney's office provided. A county manager's office worked with the county attorney on doing that, but she did the bulk of the work in that. And one of the areas that we thought the board might want to consider, in addition to what Eden has outlined in her memo that you have, was the issue of nonprofit IRS status as a 501c, and which type of C agencies, and we were recommending C3, C19, and if the board wanted to include the chambers, C6. C6 would be businesses that were chambers of commerce or business leagues, such as the League of Women Voters would be included in that. So those are three types of 501c agencies that the board might want to include. We just need to get the board's direction so we know how to complete the application and then be able to move that forward. So we're hoping for board direction on that.
Commissioner Tobias?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I mentioned this on your mask proposal.
Yes, sir.
And I want to thank, first of all, Ms. Bentley's office for doing an amazing task of going through the nonprofits that were out there and deciding which ones met that objectionable criteria, but without using any criteria to say that it was absolutely objectionable. So the tax status works. I would like to advocate for the first two of the three that Mr. Abate said, 501c3 and 501c19, for two reasons. Reason number one, the federal Paycheck Protection, the PPP, only allowed organizations that were 501c3 or 501c19. So we would just be mirroring what the federal government had decided. That's number one. And number two, what makes 501c3 and 501c19 different from the other ones? They have strict federal restrictions from lobbying. So in other words, we are not contributing to organizations that turn around and take some of the taxpayer money and give it to lobbyists who turn around and give it to us. So this is a perception type of arrangement, and certain chambers give money to lobbying organizations that turn around and give it to us. So this is not happening necessarily in Washington, D.C. This happens here in Brevard County. If you got a check from Business Voice at one time or another, that was money that came from the chamber. I have no problem. They haven't given me money this time, but previous to that, this is money that came from businesses. Now we would be funneling money from taxpayers into these organizations that would end up in our campaign accounts. So for the reasons to mirror the federal PPP funds and the reasons to keep money out of lobbyists' hands that turn out to us, I would advocate for limiting the nonprofits to the 501c3s and the 501c19. The fewer organizations that get it, the argument would be made, if we have a pot of $10 million, the more money that would go to the businesses that help to employ folks. So that was, I believe, option number 2.
You want to do some horse trading, Commissioner Tobias?
We were on the same side last time. What do you want to trade?
Well, I don't know. I mean, this could
And
be
we're
a
only
little
2 votes, so
Could be a little ask, a bit ask.
you and I failed before.
All right, so here's what I'm thinking. I'll support that if you will also support allocating out of the unallocated portion of the CARES Act, or we could even take it out of the 10 million. I don't care either way if that would be a make it or break it for you. Up to, or a cap of 100,000 per commission district, where the commissioners would be able to allocate that funding to either not-for-profits or nonprofits which comply with the federal CARES Act requirements but are otherwise excluded due to county policy. So in this case, one of the policies would be if it's a C6. I don't plan on giving a penny to a C6, but if someone feels really compelled in their heart to give to a particular C6 or a C whatever, they can do that as long as it still gets vetted by staff to make sure it's compliant with the federal requirements. And if someone doesn't do it, then it's 100,000 less that's potentially on the table. Commissioner Isnardi, and then I see Commissioner
You got
Tobias'
me
wheels
speechless.
turning.
I would just say, I mean, what if, like I say, a C6, it seems to be, the chamber seems to be the subject of John's crossfire, and that's okay, I get it. But quite honestly, most people, like, from businesses that write people checks for running, I mean, you could easily argue that as well. And many big businesses also have more paid lobbyists than some chambers do. And I think it's the Melbourne Chamber doesn't even have a paid lobbyist, I don't believe. Could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that they don't. Maybe that make that a requirement. Just say, they qualify if they don't. If that's your gripe.
But for how long?
And
I don't know. I don't know what the
Yeah,
solution is, but
but
you talk about picking winners and losers. That's exactly what you're doing. You're
Miss-
saying they're excluded because their lobbyists may go to Tallahassee and get them money?
Listen,
or-
I like your argument, but I'm fighting a losing battle right now. Here's the response. You avoid this altogether. Is you take this money that is our grandkids and our great grandkids' money, and you send it back to Washington D.C.
Because
that
they
is the
spend
solution.
it so correctly when you do that, and they
No,
will.
that it goes to the Treasury, so it's not spent. And
Yeah.
either way, just because they waste money doesn't give us the right to waste our grandkids. I quite frankly won't do it. I like the idea. It's very interesting. It would be fun writing $100,000 check to the U.S. Treasury. The only time that would be okay. But not that
I'll
I
let
don't
the Treasury count.
not that I don't trust anyone here. I just don't think that puts us in the best. And as far as when it goes to the chamber, here's what happens. It's not rocket science. I mean, it's very simple. The chamber transfers money in Brevard County to Business Voice, direct transfer. There are receipts. I'd be more than willing. They have to, and then Business Voice turns around and writes checks. So does the chamber have a lobbyist? Well, they have hundreds of lobbyists in Washington, D.C. They have at least 10 lobbyists, individual as well as contracted lobbyists in Tallahassee. Do they have a lobbyist here in Brevard County? No, but they play in elections. They absolutely play in elections, and there is a
But
direct correlation.
do they do it, or do their members? Because I think you're giving, and I don't mean any offense, and I probably will cut my own throat by saying this, but I think you're giving Business Voice way too much credit. I mean, up
listen,
until last year, nobody would even talk to them because of what some of their members were doing.
I still don't.
Now, honestly, if a politician can be bought with $1,000 check from the Business Voice, then everybody's doomed. Because I'll tell you, I know some of those members, and they're good business owners, and I know accountants, and I know people that I'm sure you respect.
I
but
support them.
It's not like they're building signs or working on street
I get
corners.
it.
I promise.
Whether they, and to my knowledge, they haven't endorsed either me or my opponent. They haven't given me any money in this cycle, just to be very fair. I support their decision to play in campaigns. I encourage everyone to play in campaigns, whether it be volunteering or direct contributions. So I support Business Voice or any other organization out there doing it wholeheartedly. Here's where my issue is. Now we're taking public dollars and giving it to an organization that is playing in races. Then I have a problem with, it's the same thing with giving to charities. Yeah, it's good to give to politicians, but you probably shouldn't be giving public money to politicians. The same way it's good to give private money to charities, but you probably shouldn't be giving public money to charities. So, I don't disagree with you.
I get your point.
Horse trading was giving it to 501c3s and 501c19s. The reality, I'd like to give it back to the federal government, because the money, as Commissioner Smith has said, doesn't exist. This is money that is borrowed from future generations. I wish they understood the mountain of debt, more than $26 trillion of debt that they are being born into. And by saying that, hey, listen, this is a small percentage, yes, it is. But it's also $105 million, which in my book is certainly a lot of money. So I can vote for the 501c3 and 501c19. But I can't, vote to have these little, pockets of money, whether they come within that $10 million or whether they come outside the $10 million. But the other commissioners may disagree altogether. And I would ask Mr. Abate, did you happen to, Mr. Chair, can I ask a question?
Please.
Yes. Did you happen to look at the number of charities that fit the 501c3, 50119, and those that fall outside that?
Yes, there's about 500 nonprofits that are 501c3 in Brevard County.
That are 501c3?
Right.
Or what about 19?
I don't know. I don't think there's that many.
Okay, and how many charities are there altogether?
We have no idea.
Okay, so that's another thing. If
When
you're
you say charity, you mean nonprofits?
sorry, nonprofits. You have no idea.
No.
Okay, so, if we have a pot of money of $10 million, and there's a cap of 500, that's more money that would go to businesses. I guess that's a policy decision whether or not we want to include that or not. I'm on the idea of airing it just to the C3s and C19s.
All right, we'll hear from Commissioner Smith and then Commissioner Pritchett, and then I'll jump in.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
I think the comment was made at the last meeting that it's funny that Commissioner DeBaia wants to put limits on something he's not going to vote for anyway. So I think that's worth repeating. I want to see this money, if we're going to spend it, I want to see it go to as many places as we can get it. I think the whole purpose of the money is to get money into the economy, and quicker the better. And I said that over the phone last time, because if it's sitting in a pot in the county and it's not being used, then there's no purpose. The purpose is to get it out into the economy and stimulate the economy. So as many responsible business people, business companies as we can find, and that's the key word, responsible, not some fly-by-night operation, but legitimate companies. If it can stimulate the economy, I'm for it.
Commissioner Pritchett?
Oh, I didn't put a light on, but you're going to make me talk. The 501c3s, 501c19s are good, and you actually start getting my attention a little bit, and I start thinking about the chambers, and, I don't know why they did the 501c6s. They probably should have just been some other type of entity like a corporation. I don't know. It makes sense to me for the businesses that they do and what they serve. I guess they did that for tax purposes. But on that note, I got kicking through it, and they serve a great. They just do good helping businesses get together and to continue moving forward. And I think the economy is so important, what's coming up. So I'm going to support that. But I would like, just from what Commissioner Tobias said, number one, I make a commitment. I won't take any money from the business voice in this campaign. And I also would like to maybe stipulate in this that the chambers don't maybe throw any support money there until after elections either, until we get through this. So that makes it a little bit more clean of a process. There's nothing that's going to affect this election as far as chambers getting money. So maybe do this at the chambers to get this, just make a commitment they won't write any checks to Business Voice till after the election cycle. And you guys do whatever you need to do, but I think I'm going to support the chambers in this because I just think they do a good job. And I don't know why they're a 501c6, but it's what they are, so I'm going to support that.
I'm gonna step back to my prior proposal, and I kind of have been honing it a little bit here to make it a little more understandable and to make it make sense. Because then the individual commissioners could decide to throw some money toward the chambers in their districts if that's what they choose to do. And if they don't want to, they don't have to. If they want to put it in another district, they can do that too. So I would suggest you consider allocating up to $100,000 per commission district, or I should say per commission office, because it really doesn't have to be spent within the district if they don't want it to be allocated to nonprofits or not-for-profit businesses which comply with CARES Act federal funding requirements that are for any reason not compliant with one or more county requirements over and above the federal requirements. So they'd have to comply with that. Yes, ma'am.
I would feel a little funny doing that in election season myself. So I don't think with good conscience I can do that because it could look like I'm trying to buy votes. So with all cautiousness, I can't support that in election season for me. If I wasn't running, I might, but.
Well, give me your 100. I'll parcel it out fairly.
So you want all 500 here to go ahead?
Actually, I don't want that because the calls would be incredible.
Okay. But that's why I don't feel like I can support that.
Well, let's see where other folks are at with it, because then alternatively, is for Commissioner Tobias, if you don't want to allocate the 100, you could return it to the feds. You could send it back to the Treasury for that 100. So you would have the absolute ability to make sure that at least $100,000 isn't spent that you don't want to have spent. Something to think of.
Less than 1% of the 105 million, is that what you're referring to?
The 105 million is less than 1% of the overall pot too. So yeah, still $100,000
So less than
a lot of
1%
money.
of 1%. I'm with you. It's still, during an election season. And I understand you're not up for election, so I don't think you're doing this with any type of electoral,
Not hardly.
intentions whatsoever. And since you self-funded, clearly, that's not the case. But it's not a position that I'd like to be in, and not a position I'd like to put staff in. And if we're going to go down that road, we might as well divide the amount of money that we spend on roads and hand it to us to pick which roads we want to pave or reconstruct, instead of looking, have a professional staff to make those decisions, or make those recommendations for us countywide. So I'm really not comfortable with
I
it.
figured I'd just throw it out there as an alternative. Okay. Yeah, the one I was thinking of, quite frankly, it's not, it's not really underhanded. It doesn't benefit me personally, but the Humane Society has, you knew it, didn't you? You knew it. You knew it. No, I thought that they were as well, but the requirement that we had with the cap of 50 full-time equivalent employees, that cuts them out. And-
Mr. Chair?
Yeah. Please.
I'm okay with making it an exception to the Humane Society,
I like that, good.
that they don't necessarily need to meet that threshold, if that helps you get there,
It
because there's a
does.
great, and they'd be offered an equal amount of everyone else. They wouldn't get a $100,000 check, but if everyone got a $7,000 check, and I have no idea what it'll be, they would be granted that equal amount.
Yeah, could I, actually, let's hear from Commissioner Isnardi. Commissioner Isnardi?
I think I'm going to sit over there somewhere next time. Do you think, are we just going to pick the Humane Society, or is it all animal rescues? Because we have a lot of really good organizations in the county, and I think you open that door.
The problem is most of the other ones, quite frankly, don't have 50 full-time employees. That's why them. So like Coastal Poodle Rescue, for instance, I don't know if they have any qualifying expenses, but there's no way they have 50 full-time equivalents. Yeah, I think the vast majority of them are already in the mix. SPCA, I don't know about them. And frankly, I don't know their people to the same extent as I do with
But
Humane
let's
Society.
just not exclude them. Let's just, or you could just say animal rescue with more than 50 employees. It's obvious.
Yeah, I'm
right?
fine. If you want to say animal rescue with more than 50 employees. Okay, so I would ask for a motion in that case to allow to apply within the group of $10 million that we've allocated at the prior meeting, any animal rescue organization that otherwise complies, we're simply relieving them of the obligation to be capped at 50 employees. All right, motion from Commissioner Pritchett. I'll second it. Any discussion? And I see Commissioner Smith has a light before we vote.
Well, not in this particular item. I just don't feel comfortable being a commissioner in charge of $100,000 to give out to anybody or any entity. I would rather staff, they're totally disassociated. They don't have to worry about being accused of playing favorites. I just don't think it's a good idea.
Yeah, part of it, I was thinking with the chambers, that's a way to get the C3s and the C19s included, but also ensure the chambers have the ability to get funded, but it wouldn't come out of the same pot. It would be coming out of a restricted, smaller pot. It's an idea. I'm not going to push forward with that at this point. Yeah, I wasn't thinking about the political side of it with the elections. That certainly does play a part, I suppose. But any further discussion on the motion?
Sorry, Mr.
Please,
Chair,
sir.
just
Yes.
a clarification. Does this limit it to C3s and C19s, or is this separate of
Well,
that
before we
motion?
didn't even get into that yet. So my thought is what we'll do is after we
Okay, got it,
address
fine.
this, we'll have a separate motion in all likelihood dealing with whether to restrict to C3s, 19s, 6s. Fair enough. So this is just to relieve animal rescue nonprofits or not-for-profits from the obligation that they not exceed that cap of 50 employees. That's the only thing contemplated by the motion. All right, all in favor of that, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, passes unanimously. All right, now we can get on to the C3-19-6 debate. Commissioner Pritchett?
I'd like to make a motion to go with the recommendations to include 501c3s, 501c19s, 501c6, with the stipulation that the chambers would, until after November elections, not write any checks out to the Business Voice.
So starting instantaneously from now through that
Yes.
in order to qualify?
Yes.
All right, I'll go ahead and second that, Commissioner Isnardi.
And normally I wouldn't have a problem with that, but that's a very specific requirement. And Ms. Bentley?
Do you have another idea of how to phrase it?
No, that's what I'm saying.
Okay.
Is that like, because it's sort of picking on one organization? I mean, that could be perceived as that. And I'm not saying that I even agree with the motion necessarily, but, you know, if you want to include those organizations, we're saying essentially you can't, like, do business. Like, we're dictating how they do business. I think that puts us in a bad place.
Well, it's federal money, and they can take it, they can accept it or reject it. I think you have more leeway in this situation than in many others.
Right.
I think my only concern with that is what Commissioner Tobias brought up, because the Business Voice does typically support us because we're pro-business. And I don't want anything looking like we're giving to the chambers, ergo, we're getting the support that way. So
Right.
I was just trying to figure out
And
how
I
to get
could-
us out of the
and-
equation
and
for us.
us personally, we could just make a commitment not to accept money from them. I mean,
I'll be fine with that, too. I
yeah,
make
and
that commitment.
I would have no problem doing that.
Are you
But
good with that?
The problem still exists that they would, in all likelihood, support folks in municipal races, and it simply would shift the money from here to elsewhere.
But
So
it
I don't
wouldn't
think it
be,
resolves it.
but it's us deciding right now. The municipalities don't
Or
have
state,
a.
or state
Well,
races.
let me just throw this out. If we give money to XYZ business, or XYZ organization, or XYZ animal rescue, and they turn around and give $100 to somebody, I mean, you can't restrict anybody from doing that. It's a constitutional right.
It's exactly
It's
what
not a
do that.
constitutional
that's what
right.
Commissioner Nardi
No,
said.
Donations,
No, it's not a constitutional right to have the money that they're not entitled to free and clear without any obligations or restrictions.
Well, I want to change my motion to remove my restriction because Commissioner Nardi's the same place I am as far as not receiving
Mr.
funds,
Chair,
so I feel
is this a
clean.
restriction or a condition?
It's a condition as I see it. I see Ms. Bentley's nodding.
Yeah, I was leading there. So this is the same condition, and this is going to mean we're going to lose too. Same condition with mask, right? You're not,
Bingo.
no one's entitled to the money. You make the decision whether or not you go forward or not. That's what you contemplate, and thus there would be no constitutional issues one way or another.
None whatsoever, and I'm comfortable saying that. And I will say, Commissioner Tobias, if you decide to get me a Voting Buddies shirt, make sure it's under the reporting limits because I don't want to have to fill out a form on account of you. All right, so there's a motion, I believe. Do we have a second?
And I did change it to remove
Okay.
the
And
stipulation.
does the second stand?
I thought
Yes.
it was yours.
Oh, it was my second. My second doesn't stand.
It
May
doesn't
we have it?
stand?
Does not stand. Do we have
I'll
another
second it.
second?
I'll second it.
Commissioner Smith seconds it.
Sorry, can we repeat the motion now?
Oh,
that
my
there's-
Lord.
Okay.
Can we go home?
I make a motion to move forward with the 501c3s, 501c19s, and 501c6.
And Commissioner Smith seconds that, and I see a light, Commissioner Isnardi.
Yes, and I almost regret hitting it because that means we're going to talk about this even longer. And the only reason why I say that is because I think we all have good intentions and we're just so paranoid about being painted with this broad brush. And honestly, what if a business applies for a business grant and they happen to have been somebody that wrote us a check even in last election? That's what my big fear is. I keep thinking this money's available, but yet at the same time, I feel like excluding businesses or chambers or whoever, or 501(c)(6)s or 19, I think we actually sort of discriminate against them. So I'm trying to be fair and equitable. And if anybody up here can be bought for $100 or $500 or even
Exactly.
$1,000 check, then shame on you. And I don't think that's any of us up here. So with that, I'm going to support it. I know there's a motion and a second, and I'm going to call the question because if I discuss this any
Yay.
longer, I'm going to get
Technically,
angry.
calling the question is a debatable motion, just
It
to be
is, in
clear.
fact.
So it's not a
not
nuclear
auto.
weapon, as you assume.
All right, I'm going to call it anyway,
Out of
unless someone
respect
makes a
for
motion.
staff's time that's been sitting here for 4 hours and we've gotten,
All right, let's go for it. So all in favor of the motion as stated, please say aye.
aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Nay. Okay, passes 3-2 with myself and Commissioner Tobias in the negative. It's odd. It's really disturbing that we're voting together on a couple of these things here. All right, anything further, Mr. Bate?
I'm afraid to say yes. But this, I hope, will be an easy one. When the board approved the program, the CARES programs on May 5th, you had indicated a variety, of municipalities being included. One entity that we did not include was the school board. I have had some recent discussions with.
May I interject, sir?
Excuse me?
May I interject?
Go ahead.
All right, I apologize, but I think this will be to everyone's benefit. Could I have a motion to allow the school board to fall within any of the existing reimbursement categories that we've outlined. Is that sufficient, sir?
Yes.
All right, motion from Commissioner Pritchett. I'll second it. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, what else you got?
Thank you, I'm done.
Okay. All right, Ms. Bentley.
No report.
Woo! Commissioner Pritchett.
I got a real small one. When we did the PPE for small businesses, I went through the list, and I was going to ask the commission, because they gave us a list of something they used as standard. We did restaurants. I was going to ask if we could also do small retail stores in that mix also for PPE supplies.
I'm good with it.
Sure.
But how do we define a small retail store? That's my only concern. If you want to work it out
Under
with staff.
Under 25
Yeah,
people.
25 or less.
Okay.
Okay, so I make a motion to do that?
All right, I'll go ahead and second your motion. Any discussion on the motion? Do we need anything further, Ms. Bentley, as far as you're aware?
Be fine.
All right, that'll work. All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? None. Passes unanimously. Okay, that's it? All right, I've got one, and pardon me, because I'm looking at a computer over here. I had to move some things around. I had sent out a memo earlier, which is included in the minutes for today's meeting, regarding Administrative Order 05. There are a couple different proposals that I had. One of them I think is entirely non-controversial, where I asked to amend or update any references to e-fax to BECA, Brevard Electronic Court Application. e-fax is obsolete at this point, has been replaced by BECA. It's not being supported, as I understand it, any longer by the court. Pardon me, by the clerk system. The other deals with AO05 insofar as it deals with recreation partner volunteers. It's not a request to change it insofar as it applies to employees or any other type of volunteer, but specifically recreation partner volunteers, as defined in that memo. I've said it's a volunteer serving with a group or organization which has a current recreation partner agreement with the Board of County Commissioners, providing for non-exclusive use of a facility in order for the group or organization to provide recreation programs. So it's a real narrow group. I was asking to have an exception crafted to allow for folks that fall under that recreation partner volunteer definition that have convictions for nonviolent misdemeanors and or nonviolent felonies of the third degree, where their conviction dates are at least 2,500 days in the past. So that's 6.8 something years, I believe. They would have to have all terms of sentence, excluding financial obligations, completed. So we wouldn't hold them up if they owe court costs. We wouldn't prevent them from volunteering, but if everything else is complete, anything non-financial, they would be eligible. Convictions for first and second degree felonies would be automatically disqualifying as to this policy. To qualify for an exception under this with either a misdemeanor or a third degree felony, all of which would have to be nonviolent, the recreation partner volunteer applicant would need to produce a letter either from the chief law enforcement officer of the municipality in which he or she resides, or from BCSO, namely from Sheriff Wayne Ivey or whoever happens to be the sheriff in the future. Can't be delegated to another law enforcement officer. The letter has to be dated within 60 days preceding the application for recreation partner volunteer status. I've included some proposed language in the memo that was circulated that's included in the minutes, basically saying that the chief law enforcement officer is familiar with the applicant, that they don't believe they pose any elevated risk of recidivism, and they believe the applicant to be law-abiding. That's nuts and bolts what it is. And basically asked us to consider an exception for them to volunteer as a recreation partner volunteer with Brevard County. It has to be on their letterhead, has to bear their signature, whether physical or electronic. Alternatively, if they can't get that from the chief law enforcement officer, they would be able to substitute for that a letter from a circuit judge from the 18th Judicial Circuit, so one from here or Seminole, that says essentially the same thing. Wouldn't be eligible to originate from a county court judge sitting in circuit, so it would have to be a legit no-holds-barred circuit judge. Under no circumstances would the aforementioned proposal serve to permit those with convictions involving any way drug-related, including alcohol-related felonies, to operate vehicles and or heavy equipment belonging to the county. And under no circumstances shall the aforementioned proposed exception serve to permit those with convictions involving in any way, whether misdemeanor or felony, child abuse, neglect, or endangerment, to volunteer in any capacity which may require or involve direct and or indirect supervision of juveniles. They still have to meet all other criteria for recreation partner volunteer status. And essentially, that's what I'm asking that we consider changing. So the one modification, which I think is totally non-controversial, updating e-fax to Becca, Brevard electronic court application, and then the other that allows for folks with certain nonviolent convictions to volunteer is Brevard County Recreation Partner Volunteers. So Commissioner Pritchett.
Your first one's easy.
All right.
Sounds like a housekeeping item.
I'll second that motion.
For the first one?
Yes.
All right.
Yes, okay,
All
a
right, so to
motion.
change to update the e-fax to Becca, all right, we'll do that as its own. All in favor of that, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, so A005 will be updated to say Becca instead of e-fax.
And
All right.
as far as the second one, if we have to vote on it today, I'm going to vote no, because I have a lot of items that are giving me a little bit of heartburn on it. We're heavy into youth sports and up in our area.
Right.
And so I got thinking, well, what if they let them do it with the men's and women's? Like maybe they can be rec partners with men's and women. Then I don't know how to get an age criteria on there, because sometimes when they get older, you still have a vulnerable population again. So
I'm trying to follow, I
Aaron-
apologize.
That's okay. Aaron, did I not say it good?
No, I'm just, maybe it's because we've had so many hours in the meeting. I'm just not following what the concern is.
Well, we have children's sports, and I have, Commissioner Tobias brought this up, people do plead down on things. And in my lifetime, I know a few people that might have ended up with just the charges of drugs or something, but there was something else that was underlying that just didn't come up. So, this has been working as far as protecting the vulnerable population. So as of right now, I don't want to change it, but if you gave me a little bit of time, there might be something else I could think through. But right now, I have great, and I know you would never do that either, I just have great caution right now making a change on something that seems to be working. So,
Commissioner Isnardi?
I have a question. Is this a problem? Do we have volunteers
Well, I'll
that
give you an
request
example.
to come to recreation or want to volunteer for recreational things that have convictions?
We had a fellow, and I know it comes up from
I
time
mean,
to
are we
time.
changing the rules because of one guy? Because that's
Well, it's the first one that's been brought to my attention.
because
And then
that's the
after
first
that-
time I've heard of it. And the reason, and
Right.
I'll let you answer in a second,
Yeah.
but I mean, that's the reason why I'm asking. We're creating a big bureaucracy, big set of rules, and a big change in our way of doing things that have worked based on one incident that maybe is unfortunate, but has managed to keep the population safe. So I'm not comfortable with this right now as it sits, especially if you're going to tell me it's one or two people.
Sure. Here's what I'll tell you. It was first brought to my attention not too long ago, this past week. We had a call from Michael Blake in Cocoa, and also there's a BCSO commander, I can't recall which one offhand, who's essentially vouching for this individual who wants to serve as a rec partner volunteer. So it's someone who had a lot of drug issues in their past. They haven't had any convictions for anything in many years. This is kind of like one of those folks that turns their life around and wants now to contribute to society. This isn't someone who has any violence in their history ever, doesn't have anything to do with abusing children, neglecting them, endangering them, anything of that sort, and they want to volunteer with the Pop Warner League. Our outside agency that screens them said that he was approved as far as their screening process was concerned. In fact, the school board approved him to volunteer with the school board, but past our outside agency, which does the checks, it was discovered that he had certain convictions that may run afoul of A005 because they require a level 1 clearance, which is a high-level security check, which has inordinately more difficult requirements to get through than some of the others. But this is someone who, at least according to a BCSO commander, as well as Michael Blake in Cocoa, really doesn't pose any risk to anyone. And when I looked at that, I've heard that we've had other folks that have been denied in the past for lesser convictions, and that's kind of concerning to me that we have folks, let's say someone had a theft 20 years ago, or they had a possession of cannabis 10 years ago. Are they really a danger to coach kids Pop Warner? I don't think so. And I don't want to put someone that's going to pose a risk to children, but if the chief law enforcement officer is willing to vouch for them and they otherwise pass everything, I mean, that's a pretty high bar to meet to begin with. That's why I'm not saying just let them do it, period. It's specifically for this type of volunteer, not even volunteers as a whole, and they would have that overwhelmingly difficult step to get a letter from either a circuit judge or the chief law enforcement officer. So there is certainly a safeguard there.
And I really feel for that guy, but at the same time, I've been here almost 4 years now, and I've never had one person contact my office saying they couldn't be a recreational volunteer, and they wanted us to change the rules. And I hesitate to do that based on one. And again, if it's a marijuana charge, was it an assault and a marijuana charge first?
No, that's why
And
I
I'm
said
not
nothing
talking about
violent.
him, and
Yeah.
I feel really bad for him, because he's probably a really fine individual. But again, I'm not comfortable changing our entire rules because there's one guy that's just a really stellar citizen.
Well, he's the one guy that happened to bring it to my attention, but in finding out that there have been people that have been disqualified for less, that to me is concerning as well. If it were just the one guy, I don't know that I would approach it this way, but my thought is if there have been others that have been shot down for things that, don't involve violence, that don't involve anything with kids.
And I get it, but then staff should have brought it to any one of our attentions before. It's never been brought to my attention.
It is
So I'm
now.
just saying, well, I know it is, but again, I'm not comfortable changing all the rules. I mean, I'm just not.
Well, I'm not in a rush to get this done. I know that there is a deadline for Pop Warner training, so if we don't approve it today, he's not in all likelihood going to be able to do it this year. But if it's something we can implement by next year, if that's what people are more comfortable with, I would certainly encourage you to look at it. Commissioner Tobias?
Thank you. Are you willing, I'm not going to public record
Yeah.
request, but are you at liberty to share the individual's name that you're referring to?
It was Livingston, I believe. Is that right, Ms. Donner? Livingston. And he's got an extensive background,
And
but nothing that would.
birth date, I imagine they're, yeah. But there are a couple issues here. First of all, is amending, and this is a technical issue, one that I think that we can move forward and around. I don't know that we really want to be amending administrative orders. I think that probably comes under the purview of the county manager. What we could potentially do is do a board policy and let the board policy change the administrative order instead of, stepping on our county manager's toes.
Yeah, that works.
Do you have a year? Was it 64?
Ms. Donner, I think it was, what was it, basically drugs and theft stuff from years back? Wasn't that what it was?
No, I'm just looking for date of birth. 64, is it a Ralph?
Ralph, yes.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, he's
Looking
got a
at it
bunch of
here.
stuff, but it's all old.
Well, I mean, we're looking at felony theft, failure to appear, violation of probation, contempt of court, obstruction by a disguised person. I didn't even know what that meant. I don't know what that means. Burglary, trafficking in stolen property. Some of these fall outside of your 6 years, but are within the last 10 years. I can't support it for a number of reasons, but I wanted to give you some of those. So if you want to work around it, I just wanted to, outside of, first of all, you said excluding court costs.
Right.
The voters of Florida, when they voted for the amendment about felons voting, they were
Right.
pretty darn clear that all conditions of the sentence must be met in order to get the get the ability to vote again. Some liberal judges have disagreed. Thankfully, the Supreme Court has upheld the will of the people, and those felons cannot vote. So if they cannot vote, I don't think that they should, not upheld, but they have decided not to hear it. You know the legal term better than I, till thankfully after at least Florida's August
PCA,
election.
Ms. Bentley?
So I would hope that they pay their court costs. On top of that, you mentioned that child abuse and child neglect as being crimes that would not be eligible under this policy.
Right.
Are you referring specifically the Florida statute 827, which is like abuse, aggravated abuse, and neglect of a child? Is that correct?
I left it real broad, and I think I phrased in there in any way related to. So it would certainly contemplate that and anything else where there's a causal connection.
Okay. So, and I hate to bring this up, but
Yeah.
this covered under a different chapter, 847, is the stuff we just talked about.
Yeah.
Transmission of obscene materials to a minor, which is a third-degree felony. That would, now, Mr. Livingston, looking at his, is not there, but that would fall underneath the criteria, most likely, that you would, if it was more than 6 years in their past, allow them to participate.
No. It's, if they
Why?
ever.
It's not covered under, that's a different chapter of law.
If they ever had anything involving in any way, whether misdemeanor or felony, child abuse, neglect, or endangerment, that would be automatically prohibiting regardless of when it occurred.
Yeah, I
Same thing with
get
violence.
you, but, yeah, I'm with you, but abuse, aggravated abuse, and neglect of a child is described in 827. The transmission of obscene material by a minor is a completely different section of law. That's 847. So those are two different.
Yeah, different chapters.
Different chapters.
Sure.
Just to be, would 847 also be covered?
Yeah, like I said, whether it's under one particular chapter or another, if it in any way relates to child abuse, neglect, or endangerment, it would be disqualifying. So I would contemplate that as being disqualifying as well. That's correct.
Because statute differentiates those two, just to be very clear.
Well, they're just in different chapters. It doesn't say one is or isn't
Okay.
in a
And
fault
finally,
category.
in your, does Mr. Livingston have any other methods in which other than the rubric you set up, does he have any other redress to be able to coach Pop Warner at this time?
Not here, I don't believe so. And again, this is kind of an
So-
outlier for me.
My question here is, I know it's a long shot, but we're only talking about one person. Article 4, Section 8 of the Florida Constitution gives the governor the ability to pardon state crimes. So does Mr. Livingston have the ability to have all of his crimes pardoned at this juncture?
That's beyond my level of knowledge. I don't have enough knowledge to
I
answer
would
that one
argue,
way or
I
the
would
other.
argue that he, or anyone, should they want to do it, go, instead of waste the time of judges that you probably know are backlogged.
Sure.
Our sheriff, that is putting out fires on a daily basis, and to try to get their crimes.
I understand where you're coming from, but again, I keep hearing for one person. I just want to stress, I'm not suggesting this solely for this gentleman's benefit. Prior to this, I had no idea that he even existed. So I don't have anything for or against this individual other than what I've heard. I was impressed by the fact that a BCSO commander is willing to vouch for him. I was impressed by the fact that we have decent, upstanding people in the community willing to vouch for him. It's an outlier to me as well in the sense that Brevard Public Schools has approved him to volunteer there, where he certainly can be around kids, but we have a concern here that is disqualifying to him, even though our own outside agency that does the background investigation said he's good to go. So I say it's not for him specifically because he was the first one that caused this to be brought to my mind, to my attention. And in speaking with staff, finding out that people have been disqualified for less, it's kind of unfortunate that we're disqualifying people for less. If there's a theft conviction in the background, if we're worried he's going to run off with a softball or a baseball, I mean, that's a pretty small worry in the scheme of things.
Well, felony theft, I think in the state of Florida is at least $300.
Sure.
So it's a really
But
expensive baseball.
there's nothing to steal in a Pop Warner game. I mean, that's my point. And you're talking from so many years ago. There doesn't seem to be any sort of causal connection between what he did long, long ago and the capacity in which he's seeking to volunteer.
One more question.
Sure.
Sure. And I don't know this. You can answer, or Ms. Bentley can answer. Can you help me with liability perspective? If we were to change policy, grant someone the opportunity, and God forbid something bad happen, is there any liability, whether it would be on the county or not the individual law enforcement officer, but maybe the insurance policy on the agency that ultimately is paid through tax dollars? Would an attorney have an ability to?
They can always try. Our Parks Rec agreements do address that. They have an indemnification clause covering any claims arising from the volunteers or the rec partners' activities.
But just to be clear, if it was challenged, we still would have to.
Well, if we got
their staff
sued-
time and
We would have to defend it. I think it would be on the rec partners in the end, but certainly anyone can join us in a lawsuit. We
And-
should have coverage with insurance, though.
so the question would be if the sheriff signed up on it as a chief law enforcement officer, that ABC was a good guy or a good person, and then ABC turned out to do something horrific. Obviously, the sheriff as an individual probably would be safe, but would his insurance?
Is it fair to say that anyone can sue anyone for anything they want?
Well, that's true. I don't know of a case on point that would address that issue, but it's certainly a possibility.
Commissioner Pritchett?
God bless this little fella getting picked out today on this, but since you said felony theft, when we do this, we're also opening up rec partners that do work with elderly, vulnerable population, and that could be a real problem with somebody that's a rec partner that's working with some retirement people, because it's really easy to steal from them. Not that he would. Again, God bless him on this. But I think when you have somebody that's been convicted of something, they're a higher risk population, because somebody's already crossed a line at one time, whether they're better or not. And not that he might not deserve a second chance somewhere. I don't know him, so this makes it so easy. Yeah. But it's like we were talking about earlier. Sometimes you do certain things which cost you the privilege. It might not cost you certain aspects of life, but you lose a certain privilege that you might have had if you hadn't done certain things. So I, from what Commissioner Tobias just read, I just started getting concerned, because let's say that we did this and we're just going to let them work with the kids. Mm-hmm. Well, then we put out word where if you're convicted of a felony, you can't mess with the old people, but you can go ahead and work with the children. I think that is just a horrible statement. So Commissioner Lober, thank you for bringing this. I think this is going to be a really, really tough one to change.
I'm going to let it be for now. I think I'm going to let it be for now. I kind of have
Let's go home.
An inkling in terms of where the commission is. All right, that's all I have in my report. Let's see, we did have one, Commissioner Tobias, that was under your report. It was a gentleman who indicated earlier that he put a card in. It was actually for L5, Jason Perez, so he already spoke, so there's nothing for that. You've got anything, sir?
No, Mr. Chair.
All right, Commissioner Smith.
No report. Let's go home.
I'm going to get something to eat first. Commissioner Nardi.
No report, and I'm hungry.
I mean, we can just hold off on adjourning if you want to hang out a little longer. All right, we'll go ahead and adjourn at 1:34. Thank you guys for your patience.
The opinions expressed by any member of the public during any period of public comment do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of the Board of County Commissioners of Brevard County, Florida, Space Coast Government Television, or the program sponsor, and are solely those of the presenter. The Board of County Commissioners of Brevard County, Florida, Space Coast Government Television, and the program sponsor hereby expressly disclaim any and all responsibility or liability for any defamatory or slanderous statements expressed by any member of the public during any such period.